Steve Harvey, the face of countless television successes, was preparing for his next big venture, a morning show filmed in a brand new, cutting-edge studio in Atlanta. This studio was everything one could dream of, filled with the latest technology, sleek designs, and an atmosphere that buzzed with potential. It was here that Steve would connect with his audience like never before, offering them laughter, advice, and a fresh start to their day. But as the team worked to set up for the first episode, a subtle chill lingered in the air. This was more than just the cool hum of air conditioning. It was a feeling that something was off, a quiet, unsettling presence that seemed to drift through the studio's corridors. Despite the state-of-the-art surroundings, there was an underlying sense of unease that no one could quite put their finger on. The studio, though new, was built on old ground, land that carried whispers of a dark past. Rumors had circulated among the older staff members about the site's previous occupant, a building that had burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was an accident, others weren't so sure. The fire had claimed lives, and stories suggested that the spirits of those lost in the blaze might still linger. Steve, ever the skeptic, pushed these thoughts aside. He was focused on the show, on creating something memorable, something that would bring joy to his viewers. Yet, as he walked through the studio, he couldn't shake the feeling that there were eyes on him, unseen, but undeniably there. The first episode was a success, but as Steve left the studio that evening, the unease returned. The normally vibrant space felt darker, the shadows longer. As he locked the doors behind him, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. What if the stories were true? But Steve quickly dismissed the idea. He had a show to run, after all, and no time for ghost stories. Yet, as he drove home that night, the chill of the studio lingered, and a quiet fear began to take root, waiting for the right moment to grow. As the days went on, the strange occurrences in the studio became harder to ignore. It started with minor technical glitches, cameras malfunctioning without reason, lights flickering at the most inopportune moments, and microphones picking up odd whispers that no one could trace. The crew dismissed these issues as typical of a new studio working out its kinks, but the glitches continued, persistent and unexplained. What was initially brushed off as simple tech issues soon began to feel more sinister. The whispers picked up by the microphones were incomprehensible, but chilling, like the soft murmur of a crowd that wasn't there. The cold drafts grew stronger, often felt by multiple people at the same time, sending shivers down their spines. Steve, ever the professional, maintained his focus on the show. Yet the unease gnawed at him. Each day the studio felt a little darker, the air a bit heavier. The crew, once enthusiastic and upbeat, now moved with a subtle caution, as if they were intruding in a space that didn't belong to them. And in the quiet moments, when the cameras were off and the set was empty, there was always the sense that someone was watching. The shadow appeared subtly at first, barely noticeable amidst the bustle of the studio. It would dart across the periphery of someone's vision, vanishing the moment they turned their head. Steve began seeing it more frequently, a dark, indistinct figure lurking just beyond the lights. No matter how many times he tried to catch it, the shadow always eluded him, disappearing into thin air. At first, Steve thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him, the result of long hours and mounting stress. But then, the crew started to see it too. The shadow began to take on a more defined shape, a tall, looming figure that seemed to move with purpose, always staying just out of reach. It was never clear, never visible enough to be certain, but its presence was undeniable. The sightings became more frequent, more unsettling. The figure never appeared on camera, never showed up in the footage. It was as if the shadow existed only in the physical space of the studio, bound by something unseen. Each appearance brought a wave of cold that swept through the room, leaving everyone on edge. The atmosphere in the studio grew tense, the excitement of the new show replaced by a quiet fear. The turning point came during a special Halloween episode where Steve invited a local medium to discuss paranormal activities. What was meant to be a fun, spooky segment quickly turned into something much darker. As the cameras rolled, the medium grew increasingly agitated, her eyes darting around the studio as if seeing things no one else could. Then, in the middle of the live broadcast, she stopped abruptly, her voice dropping to a whisper. She claimed the studio was haunted, that it was built on cursed land, The spirits, she said, were restless, their anger tied to the tragic past of the site. The medium spoke of a fire that had consumed the previous building, of lives lost in terror and pain. The energy, she said, was still here, feeding off the fear of those who entered. The broadcast ended in chaos as the lights flickered violently, the sound system crackled, and the cameras malfunctioned all at once. The medium left the studio in a panic, refusing to speak further about what she had sensed. Her warning lingered in the air, chilling everyone to the bone. The studio, once a place of excitement and hope, was now a place of dread. Disturbed by the medium's words, Steve began to dig into the history of the land where the studio now stood. What he found only deepened his fears. The site had indeed been the location of a terrible fire, one that had destroyed a building many years before. The official story was that it was an accident, but rumors persisted of something more sinister, a cover-up, a tragedy that had never been fully explained. The fire had claimed several lives, and whispers of a dark presence in the building had circulated even before the blaze. Some spoke of a cult, of rituals performed in secret, and of spirits that had been summoned but never laid to rest. The deeper Steve dug, the more convinced he became that the studio was haunted by the souls of those who had perished in the fire. The knowledge weighed heavily on him. The more he learned, the more the studio felt like a place of mourning, a site where the past had not been forgotten, nor forgiven. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and with it, a fear that the spirits were not just lingering, they were angry. The haunting didn't stay confined to the studio. Soon, it followed Steve home. What began as minor disturbances, a flicker of the lights, an unexplained chill, quickly escalated into something much more terrifying. Objects in his house moved on their own, cold spots appeared in the middle of warm rooms, and the shadowy figure he had seen in the studio began to appear in his mirrors. No matter where he went, the feeling of being watched persisted. Steve's usually lively home became a place of fear and tension. Sleep eluded him as nightmares plagued his nights, visions of fire, shadows, and ghostly figures reaching out for him. The boundary between his waking life and dreams began to blur, leaving him exhausted and on edge. The haunting grew more intense with each passing day. Steve knew that whatever was in the studio had latched onto him, refusing to let go. The spirits were no longer content with just lurking in the shadows. They were making their presence known, demanding to be acknowledged. Steve felt trapped, knowing that the terror he was experiencing was something he couldn't escape from simply by leaving the studio. Desperate to put an end to the haunting, Steve decided to confront the spirits head-on. He arranged for one final broadcast, promoting it as an exploration of the paranormal. The studio was filled with a tense energy as the crew prepared, each person on edge, aware that this episode would be different from any they had filmed before. As the cameras rolled, the studio seemed to come alive with dark energy. The lights flickered violently, the air grew colder, and the shadowy figure that had haunted Steve and his crew became visible to everyone present. Panic spread through the set as the figure moved closer, taking on a more defined, menacing form. Suddenly, the studio's technology began to fail. Cameras shut off, microphones cut out, and the sound system emitted a high-pitched screech that sent chills down everyone's spine. The shadow advanced, its presence undeniable, as if it were fueled by the fear in the room. In a moment of clarity, Steve realized that the spirits were not just restless, they were vengeful, and they were intent on making their presence known to the world. The broadcast ended abruptly as the studio descended into chaos. The shadowy figure, now fully visible, seemed to loom over Steve, its dark form threatening to consume him. The crew fled in terror, leaving Steve alone to face the entity that had haunted him for so long. The aftermath of that final broadcast was devastating. The show was canceled, and the studio was permanently shut down, deemed too dangerous to continue operating. Steve was left traumatized, haunted by the events he had experienced and the knowledge that the spirits were still out there, lingering in the shadows. The studio, once a place of hope and creativity, was now abandoned, its halls silent and cold. It didn't take long for rumors to spread, stories of strange lights, unexplained sounds, and sightings of the shadowy figure that had terrorized Steve and his crew. The building quickly gained a reputation as one of the most haunted places in Atlanta, drawing the curious and the brave, but also serving as a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked within. For Steve, the haunting was not something that ended with the show. The nightmares continued, and the feeling of being watched never truly left him. The spirits that had been awakened by the studio's construction were still out there, their presence felt by anyone who dared to get too close. And though Steve had survived the ordeal, he knew that the curse of the haunted studio would remain with him, a dark chapter in his life that would never fully close